Okay, it's a long day, so I think that we will start. In this last session, well, by the way, my name is Barak Medina. I'm from the law faculty here at the Hebrew University, formerly rector of the university. And in this last session, we have three distinguished speakers that will share with us their perspectives, some from the outside, one from the inside. And just to give a preliminary note from my own perspective, following the discussions today and other observations of what's going on here, it seems to me that the challenge that we are facing, and I think it was mentioned one way or another during the day, the challenge that we are facing is not only what is the just solution, what is the solution that we, if we were the Tsar or some authority, would impose, but also how do we make this solution real? How do we convince the constituencies that these solutions should be implemented? And I think the second challenge of convincing others that this is the right path to go is even more difficult than just finding what we personally believe is just or right or fair or something like that. And in this respect, I'm not sure that all of us that live here, mainly Palestinians and Israelis, are able to fully understand the perspective of the other side. Just to look at what happened since October 7th, it seems to me that many among the Jewish community in Israel are not able to understand, to realize the trauma, the shock, what we heard about Nakba, that Palestinians experienced, not only those who were directly affected by the war, but also those who are from the external circle. But at the same time, the very same time, I'm not sure that many of the Palestinian community understand or realize the shock, the trauma that Israelis still feel up until today from October 7th, not only in the sense of what happened there, but about their understanding about the possibilities for a shared future. And I think that realizing the perspective of both sides is essential, and I don't have any simple solution. It's, of course, in many cases, and we will hear about these issues from the speakers, solutions are coming in a top-down form. Leaders, visionaries, find one way or another a solution. Even the Oslo peace process started in secret. And sometimes it is possible to sell the people a solution that leaders view as the just one or the right one. But I think that it is essential to work bottom up to establish some kind of understanding of where we should be heading, and I think, as I said, this is a challenge that we should also consider. So, as I said, we have three distinguished persons that will share with us their thoughts. The first is Dan Kurtzer, one of those who should not be interested. No need no introduction here, but I'll say a few words anyhow. He's the Daniel Abelson professor in the Middle East Policy Studies at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. And before joining Princeton faculty in 2006, Dan served for nearly 30 years as an American diplomat. He served, among other positions, as ambassador of the United States to Egypt and then to Israel. And before that, served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. And he was deeply involved in various diplomatic efforts to bring about peace to our troubled region, and we are extremely grateful to Dan for his willingness to come here and share with us his thoughts. Dan, please.
Thank you very much. The title of this talk actually ends in a question mark. It's U.S. policy in the new administration, more of the same, or inflection point. And as we sometimes do, I'm going to give you bluff, which is bottom line up front. Answer number one is, I don't know. Answer number two takes us back to Dan Meridor this morning, who suggested that as useful as the United States has sometimes been, he didn't say that sometimes the United States has not been useful, it's really going to be up to Israelis and Palestinians to take the initiative for the breakthrough that hopefully will happen at some point. At that point, the United States and perhaps others, the Arab Quartet, Europe, and other parties may join in and help. But I think one of the things that I take away from today is, and it was a good way of structuring this day, was to focus entirely, almost entirely, on what Israelis and Palestinians think about the conflict, think about each other, and think about the road ahead. So back to the question of looking ahead at the new administration. We have an advantage in trying to answer this question in the fact that the president-elect, Donald Trump, has a track record. He was president for 4 years, and there are lessons that we might learn from that 4-year experience that can indicate where he might be headed in the next 4 years. The problem is that he really had no particular idea of what he was doing at almost any point in the administration. And particularly on this issue, he was led by two very ideologically motivated advisors. One, his son-in-law, and the other was his ambassador, David Friedman. And I've said about David Friedman, I've actually never met him, but I've said that as ambassadors go, he was probably the most effective American ambassador we've ever had. That doesn't mean he was effective for good reasons, but he accomplished the ideological purposes which had brought him to the job, and that was pushing the Palestinians to the side, turning American policy in a direction that would support settlement activity, including changing American definition of whether settlements were legal or illegal, bringing about American support for Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, and so forth and so on. So in that first 4-year term, we had a President Trump who basically didn't care that much about what his advisors were doing, as long as they could do one of two or three things. Number one, was it good for Trump personally? He's narcissistic in a very advanced manner, and therefore, if it was proved that something that was being advised would be good for Trump personally, he would be supportive. Number two, was it good for Trump politically? He had the idea back then, and he had it again this time, that he could make inroads into the Jewish vote. In other words, to take votes away from the Democratic Party. And he failed. He failed back in 2020, and he actually failed this time. 71% of American Jews voted for Kamala Harris, which is about the average that has been the case for the last 30 or 40 years. Of the 29% of American Jews who voted for Trump, what's interesting in terms of demographics and studying the community, a large percentage were Orthodox and Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews. So Trump will do things that will benefit him politically, and therefore it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for those who want him to do things for Israel for political purposes, because twice that has failed as an objective. And the third issue that motivates him, I wrote an article during his presidency, and I entitled it, "It's not about the red, white, and blue, it's about the green." He's motivated by money. by business. And we saw that in the deals that he thought he had with Saudi Arabia. They weren't deals that necessarily benefited him personally, but we saw the personal benefit as soon as he left office when his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, secured a $2 billion investment in an enterprise in which Jared Kushner had no particular experience running. So if anyone of Trump's advisors on this issue, the Palestinian-Israeli, Arab-Israel issue, can find a way to motivate either Trump's ego or his political or electoral successes or his business successes, they will have a hearing among him. We do know from the first term that he's particularly close to strong leaders, authoritarian or autocratic leaders. In this region, you remember, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, was called his favorite dictator. And that appears not to have changed. So in that respect, he would admire the Prime Minister of the State of Israel as a strong leader. And as we've heard today from those who've talked about the future of Israeli democracy, as a leader who's making inroads or cutting into the vitality of the democracy here. Because that's also going to be one of Trump's main agenda items, which is undermining some of the structural stanchions of American democracy. We're going to see an administration that might be called the administration of revenge and vengeance. You look at some of his appointments, in particular, the appointee of as FBI for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Kash Patel. Even before Patel's name was put into consideration to head the FBI, he published a list of 60 enemies of Donald Trump. And so you know that the FBI will now be weaponized to go after the enemies, or the so-called enemies, of Donald Trump. We also know from that first administration that Trump, I call him the author of The Art of the Deal, he signed the papers that somebody else wrote the book, was not a good deal maker. He pulled the United States out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran, and Iran then renewed with vigor the enrichment of uranium to a point where the estimate is they're now enriching at about 60%. And the distance between 60% and the 90% required for weaponization of a nuclear capability is much easier to reach than going from 0 to 60. So bad deal to pull the United States out of that JCPOA. He did move the American embassy to Jerusalem, but he got nothing for it. There was no deal. It was a giveaway. Maybe he expected Israel to be more moderate, more accommodating, to provide something that he could sell as a benefit. Got nothing. And he put forward he called it a vision of peace. It was a peace plan in January of 2020 that was dead before the ink was dry on the paper. It had been coordinated entirely with Israel. Palestinians had been sidetracked for some time within the administration, and everybody thought it was a terrible deal, except for David Friedman, who, as you remember, advised the Prime Minister that you can now annex the 30% of the West Bank that the deal promises. But then Trump and Kushner, thinking about the election 11 or 12 months later, said, no, that's a bridge too far, and they pulled it back. So on all of the so-called deals that this self-proclaimed deal maker made, they fell pretty flat. So we know that he's not really a deal maker, and that the issues that attract him are not necessarily the substance that all of us here and all of those who are here today focus on, which is how do you get to a conflict resolution process that has traction, that has the ability to move forward. We also know, the last issue on the backdrop is, in a way, he left office having conducted what I would call a scorched earth policy. In order to bring about the Abraham Accords, which was his one significant achievement, and he deserves credit for it, even though it was initiated by the United Arab Emirates, but they were smart enough to take advantage of that opening. But in order to do that, he changed American policy on Western Sahara, running into opposition from the entire African Union. By declaring American support for Morocco's position on Western Sahara, which Morocco said was a requirement to join the Abraham Accords, the United States was now in a position, or then in a position, of opposing the entire African Union and a succession of UN Security Council votes. He took Sudan off the terror list. Now, to be fair for a moment, when he did that, Sudan seemed to be on a better road towards moderation. But of course, right after that, Sudan has now deteriorated into its own civil war, and Sudan is the home of what is perhaps the greatest famine in the world today. And we took them off the terror list. There's no question they should not have been taken off the terror list. In one of the more interesting twists, he decided to support Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Now, for those of you who have studied the history of Israel and the Golan Heights, Israel never declared sovereignty over the Golan Heights. And in fact, Menachem Begin, in 1981, in the Golan Law, was asked that question and specifically said no. The law says Israel extends law administration and there's a third category, jurisdiction, and specifically said that's not sovereignty. So the United States, under President Trump, expressed support for Israeli sovereignty that Israel itself had not announced. It's not really all that bright. And as we know, not he, but his Secretary of State, Michael Pompeo, reversed American policy with respect to settlements, declaring them not inconsistent with international law. The payoff for that was to have some wine named after Pompeo, and not necessarily a benefit for the United States, but it tells you that not only was this man not a great deal maker, but he left behind I'll repeat the words, a scorched earth policy. Now, as we heard from Eli Podeh, which was interesting, and his analyses over these years, his book on plausible missed opportunities is really very well worth reading. What we heard is, despite all of this, there are opportunities in this region that Trump will inherit. I don't want to review all of them because we talked about them all day. Syria is an opportunity as much as a problem. Lebanon is an opportunity as much as a problem. And you go down the list, and if you had an American president who, even if he himself could not conceptualize an American strategy for dealing with these opportunities, would surround himself with people who could conceptualize the strategy, might turn things around. And there are, in fact, think tanks that are now producing papers on how a new U.S. strategy can cement activities in this region, which in fact were started, a couple of them were actually started at the end of the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration kind of brought them together. For example, we heard about the Middle East air defense system, which proved itself during Iran's attacks against Israel. There's the I-2U2. Israel, India, United Arab Emirates, and the United States are in a pact which has the promise of increasing trade and commerce and investment and a variety of other activities. The Negev Forum, which brought together a number of regional countries, including or maybe even stimulated by the United States. I don't think they have an acronym yet, the India, Middle East, Europe trade route, a little bit like the Silk Road. They have it, IMIC? Okay. It involves a trade route coming from India across the Middle East through the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, out the port of Haifa into Europe. Okay? It is the Belt and Road Initiative conceived in Washington. And you have the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, which can grow and has grown, in fact, with the Israel-Lebanon Maritime Agreement. So there are already elements in place which, if we had a president willing to appoint the right kind of people to develop the right kind of conceptual thinking, could actually translate what looks like a mess in this region into something quite different. And it's even much more important for the U.S. interests, because it would not only address the problems in this region, but we are now in a situation where we're it for the time being. Russia is rapidly pulling its personnel out of Syria. They may have actually drawn down almost all of them. We saw immediately when the onslaught began with Abu Muhammad al-Julani, they started sending their ships from Tartus out into the Mediterranean. They closed down their operations in the air base in the northwest area along the seacoast. Iran is weakened. China doesn't look like it's interested in filling that particular vacuum, which means that there is a vacuum in which the United States could play an instrumental role in a large strategic sense. Now, let me conclude by trying to put this all together with a little bit of a hopeful element. Do I really think that Trump has the patience, the creativity, the backbone, the persistence, the determination to do this? No, he does not. Will he be sold on the idea of doing this in a way that accommodates his own personal interests and his own electoral interests? That's why I started at the beginning by saying I don't know. Will somebody smart enough around him suggest to him that there are real opportunities here? We know, and he has not been shy about saying this, that he wants to win a Nobel Peace Prize. Not because he understands what it means, but because Barack Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize. And he didn't even deserve it when he won it. So Trump says, I want to win it, and if you won't give it to me when I don't deserve it, I want to do something for which it's payoff. So a strong set of advisors would bring together a constructive, forward-looking, far-sighted idea for the United States to help mobilize this region in a way that's quite different. And I'll add the last point, which goes back to what Dan Meridor said. I don't believe that the United States is the only driving force in what happens in this region. We had a moment when that was the case. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when we brought about the Madrid Peace Conference, when we mobilized an international coalition to push Iraq out of Kuwait, when we kept the PLO at that point out of the peace process at Madrid, that there was a unipolar moment in which the United States was the dominant player. It's not the case anymore. Part of it is the world is now multipolar, and part of it is that every president since then has desired to pivot away from this region. They haven't because they can't, and even if they've tried, the region has a tendency of bringing them back in, usually as a result of war or revolution or upheaval. So if you understand that as the American president, you understand that you're never going to escape this region, you're never going to be able to cut the umbilical cord, and if you understand that you don't necessarily any longer have to do it alone, you can think about those elements that come together in a strategy that could actually end a Trump presidency with an heroic outcome, a Nobel Prize winning outcome.
Thank you, Dan. I'm not sure that you will be able to escape the question of what you would recommend him if he asked you, but
I'll do that in the Q&A.
yeah, that's right. Our next speaker is Yair Hirschfeld. Yair is an Israeli peace activist, and he has been involved in preparing the concept of the Oslo peace process and led the initial negotiations. and he was involved with preparing the negotiations under all prime ministers since Yitzhak Rabin, and he is presently working with a coalition of 3 Austrian think tanks in preparing a security and stability building process for Gaza. And Yair will share with us 3 remarks on the prospect of peace. Yair, please.
Thank you. I must say I'm astonished how many people are still here. But I want to make 3 remarks. The first is, assuming there will be a ceasefire in Gaza sooner or later, what is necessary to sustain the ceasefire? Because ceasefire alone doing it is not enough. The second remark I want to try to put the question and answer the question, assuming the statement of the new advisor to President Trump, President-elect Trump, Massad Boulos, said that he wanted a roadmap to peace, a roadmap to a 2-state solution. What are the 2 essential conditions necessary, and how could this be moved forward? Only at the very, very start of the beginning. And the third remark is, what kind of global and regional environment do you need in order to help to get the peace process forward? Now, normally a ceasefire is done this was true in South Africa, this is true in Northern Ireland, and it was true after the Intifada in Israel in the late 80s and the beginning of the 1990s. A ceasefire happens when both sides understand that military activity can't get them anywhere and they need some kind of stop it. They are either exhausted or they believe that there can be a move forward in a political situation. Now, I won't tell you that this is not enough. In order to make a ceasefire work, there is presently, and this is not as good news as it will sound, but there are 5 activities necessary and 5 activities going on, which I want to report to you. The first one is the activities of the the U.S. Security Coordinator. It is an institution which was founded by the roadmap people in 2004, 2005, and you have 150 people, military and diplomats, who are working quite actively on the following 3 quite important issues. There is training going on today of Palestinians police forces to go into Gaza and work in what they call in robust areas to be able to overcome the various Hamas and not Hamas groups who cause trouble there. The training is going on for police without guns in this area, in Israeli-controlled areas, with guns in Jordan. But there is a very clear plan that the USSC has prepared to have a roll-on, roll-off system. The main reason why our beloved Prime Minister didn't want to have the Philadelphia area reached, because the roll-on, roll-off would start at the Philadelphia area, and then there comes Palestinian forces under USSC control and Egyptian support come in, and so the Israeli IDF gets out of it, and it's a roll-on, roll-off activity until slowly security forces under international oversight and training and trained by them and overseen by them can slowly take in and start to create a security structure in Gaza, which will be definitely the most essential part to maintain the ceasefire. They're part of the USSC activity is that they have a lady and colonel his task is to take care of Jewish hate crimes. I mean, you have heard that there are some things happen like this. The organization that I led for over 14 years or longer prepared in 2011, 2012 a very detailed paper on how do you deal with Jewish hate crimes. It needs a lot of activities. I can, if whoever is interested in it, I can send him the paper. We have given this to the USSC people, and they are aware of it. The question is not whether they know what to do or how to do it. The question is if there's enough political will to make it, to do it. But we may be in a situation where the political will could be there, and I believe it is a very important part. This is the first part of the 5 to maintain the ceasefire. There's a second initiative going on, and the second initiative is led also by the United States, United Kingdom, and the Netherlands, which has said we don't want to wait for the day after. We want to look on what is happening now, and we want to look into the service provision to create service in Gaza together with the Palestinian Authority. And I'll say immediately something about the Palestinian Authority. We need the 3 first major issues. There's a 4th one which they're not looking in. But the first 3 major issues that you have to look into: telecommunication, energy and water. The United States has taken telecommunication for its under its responsibility. The United Kingdom is taking energy, and the Netherlands water. They've prepared a 20-page detailed plan with the Palestinian government how to do this, and they're moving forward on it. I don't know how much they, in coordination with COGAT, I'm not sure how much COGAT is supporting it, but there's pressure to move ahead, and there's an understanding what needs to be done and how it could be done, and this is going into very practical details and very practical issues. And so this is the second activity that is necessary. There's a third activity going on. This is more theoretical, but it's very important. The UNDP has prepared the Kleinigkeit of an $18 billion plan for the first 2 years of reconstruction. And there's detailed understandings how this reconstruction should take place. There's been detailed work has been done on it. And if the go-aheads, if you have an advisor from President Trump who fits your guidelines, we have a clear idea how you combine A, B, and C together and what actually has to be done. This is worked out in all details. You have the RAND corporations worked on it. You have Palestinian billionaires, the Palestinian private sector worked on it. There is a lot of understanding on the details, how to be done, where to be done, how to move ahead, and what being done. The group I work with have prepared a plan, which I'll speak about a little bit later, which makes it clear. I won't speak too much about it, but it's you will need, in order to do reconstruction, you have today 100 lorries going into Gaza. You need 5,000 lorries or trucks. 5,000 trucks going into Gaza. We are having a plan. There's a plan with an Israeli and former Palestinian Minister of Transport going in and doing this. This is the third thing that is happening. We have a former representative in Austria of the High Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who's working with other very high-standing individuals on the possibility of governance. We have no idea how much this can be done, but we have a clear idea how this can go along with the security needs of Israel and the needs to get the Palestinians into it. And the Palestinian security forces have prepared and are preparing beginning of another plan of social capacity building in Gaza, which in itself is, who've seen it and is quite impressive. So we have some answers on the first issue. If you need to go into a ceasefire and you need to sustain it, we have there's a lot of work being done that we can take out of the Megillah, of the Torah, and it's put there by people who are quite capable and can really help in getting this done. Is there the political will to do it? I don't know yet, but that is the political capacity, the potential capacity is there. Now, regarding the two deals, I will tell you a story that I'll try to be short on that. The first thing you ask is, what is the real deal maker for each side? And I would say the deal maker for, if you say a Palestinian state, a roadmap to a Palestinian state, doesn't say anything. The Palestinians will ask, we need a deal maker for a Palestinian state, where the border is the 4th of June 67 ceasefire line. That is the basis, and from then we look into the basis. And absurdly enough, because there's so many settlement expansion now, I believe this has been reinforced rather than weakened in the last months. I can go on that why, but I would dare this statement. And I would say for the Israeli side, the most important deal maker for the right wing is the recognition of not the total illegality of the settlements, that they're not illegal. See, you look into the settlements, the wording, but that the legitimacy of the State of Israel, the legitimacy they belong to, is the Bible. And our legitimacy is not part of the UN resolution, not the Holocaust, we are not a colonial thing, but we are the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and this is our legitimacy. Now, if you look into the Bible gives you the answers. If you look in Shlach Lecha, when God tells Abraham, go and take the land will be yours, he says the land will be yours to your sons, to your 2 sons. The one is Jewish, the other one is not. And then Abraham goes on, and he has a meeting with his brother Lot, and he says, we are brothers, we don't have to fight. If you go to the right, I go to the left, and if you go to the left, I go to the right, but we can together divide the land. And there is a Tanakhic legitimacy for looking for an agreed two-state solution. And it is a way to speak to a right wing. I'll tell you who I've got it from, and this is an indication. You may know Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun. This is settler, so he's progressive settler, and he's decent. I don't want to say anything about the others. Let me go to the third issue. And the third issue is the general environment. I deeply disagree with the understanding there's there's only one Israeli-Palestinian asymmetry. There are two asymmetries. And the second asymmetry is that it is not if you go back historically, Haj Amin Hussein in 1936 asked all the Arabs to come in. And the conflict became regional. And after 1948, in the 1950s, Nasser turned the conflict into a global conflict. And we are in a global conflict. And what happened on October 7 was the outcome of a global conflict. I can go into much things, but the two blocks, the block on one side, Russia, China, Iran, and all the proxies of Iran, were one part of the block, and the United States and Europe and the Arab Sunni states, pro-Western states on the other, and we are part of it. And it was one of the reasons of the outcome, and President Biden said it. President said it part of the plan to get the Saudi peace plan done. But there was a European plan with the Saudis, and we worked under it with the Palestinians on how this would work out on the Palestinian side. The conflict was a global, regional conflict, and not only an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And obviously, what happened afterwards makes it even more clear. So what we need to achieve, what has to be achieved, and we have to look into it, and I don't know if President Trump has an idea of what I'm saying, but what we need to achieve is to see how Russia and China become part of a more pacifying and stabilizing activity, and are not part of the two blocs who try to hit each other and we are the whipping boy who gets whipped in the beginning, in the middle. And the way that we're looking at is simple. It's probably too simplistic, but it's important. You may remember Ambassador Kurtzer related to it. In September 2023, the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, Italy, and the European Union, 7 countries founded the IMEC, the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Now, if you want to take care of Gaza and to reconstruct Gaza, you need the Kleinigkeit of $100 to $120 billion. And I can assure you, not only this is more than all of us here together, but this is more than any donor community is willing to give. This can be only done if it's based on very heavy political, security, and business interests. And if you look into the developments of Saudi plans and United Arab Emirates plans, I'll give you only one figure. United Arab Emirates has a foreign trade statistics of $599 billion a year. For the United Arab Emirates to invest $15–20 billion a year is nothing, but even far less is important. Saudi Arabia has the 2030, 2040, 2050 plan. The only way this can happen if there is a major economic development. And the major economic development can only happen if you create trade security and you connect the Indian Ocean with the Arabian Gulf, the Arab Peninsula, the Red Sea, Eastern Mediterranean, and Europe. And there's an Israeli-Palestinian Jordanian NGO, EcoPeace, who's led by 3 wonderful people, an Israeli Gidon and a wonderful Palestinian lady and a wonderful Jordanian lady, but it's a big organization, and they're working on, I'm trying to help them, working on quite a lot of very practical issues. Mainly the first thing is how to create the logistics. And we have a plan how to create the logistics to start reconstruction. So there's a plan, there's the Jordanian, Israel, this goes only with Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Palestine, Israel into Gaza and Egypt. And there's a lot of things you have to do in order to get 5,000 trucks to going into Gaza. The second thing is you need a railway connection between the Gulf and Israel. You have the railway going to the Jordanian border. You need a 350-kilometer railway from one side and 120 kilometer from the other to connect it and build then a Palestinian railway system, which is quite along the RAND cooperation issue. And you have to get it to you have to turn Gaza into not the port of the Palestinian people, but Gaza has to be the port of the Middle East, together like Haifa, like Rotterdam and like Hamburg. So we have these are things that we are working on, and there is some hope for the prospects for peace. No easy way to go.
Thank you, Yair, for what you're doing and for this optimistic note. And we will conclude with another optimistic note of a story of success with Oliver McTernan. He's on Zoom, I assume, right? He's here. Oliver is director and co-founder of Forward Thinking, a UK-based organization that works to resolve conflict through an inclusive dialogue and frontline mediation, and he's also the founder of the Helsinki Policy Forum, which provides an unofficial space for policymakers. And in the last 20 years or so, he has been active in engaging Israeli and Palestinian political and religious leaders and trying to promote an inclusive dialogue and a durable peace agreement. And Oliver will share with us some thoughts about constructing the way, lessons from the Irish peace process. Oliver, please, thanks for coming.
Good evening. I'd like to share with you a paragraph I read the other day, and it says, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has proven extremely challenging to resolve despite decades of peace efforts. The situation involves deeply intertwined historical, religious, territorial, and political factors that have made finding common ground difficult. Both sides have suffered significant trauma and hold competing narratives about the land, sovereignty, and security. Those exact words could be used to describe the conflict on the island of Ireland. Every word there is relevant. And I thought it worth quoting that at the beginning of this session when we're looking at what insights, rather than lessons, I prefer the word insights, are transferable from one conflict to another, and in particular the Irish conflict, what can be learned from it. Now, I realise we have had a very long day, and I hope I haven't prepared too much. I've tried to keep to the 15 minutes, but I think it would be important to look, first of all, at the historical roots very briefly, because it's those historical roots that are being acted out even today in the peace process in Ireland, and the island of Ireland. And the second area would be to look at the immediate circumstances that led to the Troubles, the conflict that became globally reported on, and then look at the Good Friday Agreement, the essence of it, and then what insights, lessons could be applied elsewhere. So if we can really bear with me, we'll try and address all of those things. Well, the roots of the Irish conflict can actually go back to the 12th century. And it was a deposed Irish king that invited some Norman knights under the leadership of Richard de Klerk, became Strongbow, the famous character of history. He invited them to come over and help him sort out a local dispute. And of course, the invitees decided to stay. And not only to stay, but soon after them came King Henry II, and he established his rule in an area of Ireland that became known as the Pale. And it was that area where the Norman laws, rule, religion, everything was practiced. Outside the Pale, which was an area around Dublin, the old Celtic chiefs had charge, and they continued the practice, of course, of language, law, culture. So you will see there, by looking back at the history, you immediately see the evolution of two societies on a small island. And that became the root of the problem, especially by the 16th century, when we had the Reformation and England broke with Rome. It was then that Henry VIII and Elizabeth I decided to extend the British rule to the whole of the island of Ireland, and to replace the Celtic, Gaelic culture, laws and religion with the Protestant religion, the English language and English laws. And that then led to centuries of conflict. Sometimes it was managed, sometimes it erupted into violence. But the outbreak of the Troubles, as it were, in the 60s, resulted, I would say, from a situation that existed after the division of Ireland in 1921 between the North and the South. And that was when the government in the north of Ireland was established to ensure that there would be Protestant unionist rule guaranteed. And so you had, first of all, the political and constitutional status, I would say, of those 6 counties in the northeast of Ireland. And the fundamental division was between Unionists, who were predominantly Protestant and who wanted Northern Ireland to remain as part of the United Kingdom, and Nationalists, who were predominantly Catholic and who sought a united Ireland. Now, the partition, as I mentioned, created in 1921, meant the nationalists felt that their aspirations of a united Ireland could never be fulfilled. So there was enormous sense of political frustration within the community. A second area of contention was civil rights and discrimination. Catholics faced systematic discrimination in housing, allocation, employment, and voting rights. The gerrymandering of electoral boundaries ensured unionist control of many areas despite the demographics. So there was not a question of one man, one vote. You got the number of votes depending on your political and religious allegiance. So Catholics were unrepresented in law enforcement, civil service, and local government positions. The mostly Protestant police force, the RUC, was viewed with deep distrust by the Catholic community. Another area of contention was the cultural and religious identity. Deep divisions existed between the Protestant and Catholic communities in terms of education, cultural traditions, and national identity. Protestants generally identified as British, while Catholics typically identified as Irish. These identities were reinforced through separate school systems, different sports, and cultural traditions. Fourth factor, economic. Catholics faced higher unemployment rates and poorer economic prospects. Housing conditions were often worse, and economic deprivation contributed to social tension and political radicalization. And then we come to what was to be the solution. I think it was in the light of the well-reported incidents like Bloody Sunday in 1972, and then internment, imprisonment without trial in 71, scaled up the tensions to the degree that violence, pursuing violence, was inevitable. Now, there were several attempts to find a solution, the political solution, to Northern Ireland by both the British and the Irish governments. There was the Sunningdale Agreement in 1973. There was the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985, the Downing Street Agreement in 1993. But all of them failed. And why? Because all of them were top-down efforts. I found in looking at conflict and the failure of peace processes a very helpful distinction actually written by a businessman, not a peace activist. And he talked about when you're confronted with problems, they fit into 2 categories. Either a technical problem, which can be solved top-down because it's very often supplying resources and know-how, or you have what he called an attitudinal challenge. And when you're confronted with an attitudinal challenge, then it's essential that you engage everyone in the process, everyone with constituency, who need to have a change of mindset in order to move forward. Well, I think if you look at a lot of our approaches to dealing with conflict and trying to find particularly quick fix solutions, it's very often we deal with them that top-down. The agreements that I referred to, Sunningdale, the Anglo-Irish, Downing Street, were all, and the economic side was important, but the whole emphasis was given on that. Change the structures in some way, and you will get a gradual transformation of the conflict. In Ireland, it didn't work. And the key, I would say, to the success so far in the Irish peace process is the fact that it was an inclusive process. At long last, it was realized that you could not move forward unless you engaged not just Irish nationalists who had taken the political option, but also those who took a military option. And the challenge was, how do you move people who take a military option to solve political problems? How do you move them into a political process? Now, I'm going to skip quickly a lot of what I wrote, but I think the key of that is to create openings. And that's essentially what the Good Friday Agreement did. It didn't just come out of, again, a top-down approach. I think a lot of the preparation for the Good Friday Agreement came through back channels. People reaching across divides, even at a very senior level, governmental level, officials, the MI6 engaging directly with the IRA. I remember when John Reid was Home Secretary, he told me his, while George Mitchell was at the table with all the parties, his Chief of Staff was on the streets of Belfast dealing directly with the gunmen. So, it's not what I'm trying to say. The Irish experience hasn't been just a very neat, clean-cut meetings in designated places, in official rooms. But it was basically this multi-faceted approach where people with different responsibilities who could establish trust, could establish understanding, recognize what were red lines, recognize where things were moving. They prepared the whole process that led to the final agreement. And as I say, the agreement was the beginning of a peace process. It wasn't the final part of the final end. What I think would be important when looking at the text of the agreement, I'll quickly run through. Actually, given the time, I'm very conscious that we're close. I'm going to skip that because you can read it and it's all there, so you don't need me to summarize it. But I think the question is, what can be taken from the Northern Ireland experience and applied to conflicts elsewhere? I only began to realize what the Northern Ireland peace process had to offer when we had a group of senior Knesset members over in London. We, since 2004, had been bringing the various, mainly what if we could describe the Israeli right, Likud, Shas, Israel Beitenu in particular, their elected MKs coming to London as a group, cross-party, with a chance to reflect and think about issues and the challenges faces conflict. It was when Moshe Kahalon, and he won't mind me mentioning his name, when Moshe was then communications minister here, when he met with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, who became the head of the DUP, and Geoffrey was describing the challenges that he faced. And he told them the morning he was going to meet Martin McGuinness was the morning that a bomb went off in his constituency, killing people whom he knew. Now, the pressure was then on him, you mustn't go ahead with this meeting. But he, at that moment, said he knew that this was a moment when he had to lead his constituency, not be led by the constituency. It was then that Moshe said, look, you understand the sort of challenges that I face as a Likud MK. And he asked us if we would start bringing MKs over to study the Irish issue. And subsequently, I think we've had we went then to advisors and chiefs of staff, but an amazing number in the Knesset. I think about 5 or 6 of the 7 present ministers have been with us in due course to Northern Ireland. And every time they go, they're not going to come back with an immediate policy and immediate approach and fix, but they come back with an awareness that there are issues. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll pass on the paper I have where it draws out those comparisons, where there are so many areas that need, where there is cross-party. I'll just finish with one little example, was when the tensions arose between the Arab Israeli citizens and the Jewish citizens. 3 people who'd been to Belfast, Northern Ireland with us, immediately got in touch. One was Omar Barlev, who was then Security Minister, saying we need to go back and study again the policing and the issue of policing divided communities. The other was the chair of one of the constitutional committees in the Knesset who'd been there. And the third was an Arab Israeli MK who wanted to bring the mayors over to, again, have a chance to review the insights, lessons. But what struck me was it had been a good 6 years since they had been there. But the insight and the memory clicked when faced with the obvious issues that had similarities. And so, as I say, I'm going to try and respect our time, and I think we're all tired today at the end of a long day. So I will leave it at that, and I will share this paper with you so that if you're interested, you can look in more depth at the issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Do we have time for questions? Just 1 or 2 questions. Yeah. I think we'll conclude here. We are quite tired. Thank you so much, Dan, Yair, Oliver, and to all of you. And Rafi, do you want to say a final word? Thank you so much for organizing it.
Yeah, well, there are a few people here from the morning, so I appreciate your resilience more than anything else. It's been a lovely day, a pleasure to study and to get educated and to learn from all of you. I thank you for your participation, and I wish you peace. Thank you very much.